The truck coughed dust across the Nebraska road and rattled past cornfields that seemed too wide for any one country. Late summer light glazed the tassels in gold. Heat shimmered above the ditches. In the back, captured German Corporal Dieter Faust sat rigid with his hands on his knees, waiting for the prison he had imagined since France. He expected wire, curses, and watchtowers. He expected hard bunks, thin soup, and the familiar grammar of defeat. Instead, the road bent toward a farmhouse shaded by cottonwoods. A long wooden table stood under the trees, and even before the truck stopped, he saw white plates, bowls, pitchers, and steam rising into the still air. There was fried chicken stacked on platters. There were yellow ears of corn slick with butter, thick slices of tomato, biscuits, preserves, and tall glasses of iced tea shining with beads of water. A boy brushed flies away with a towel. A woman set down another bowl as casually as if the war were happening on another planet. Faust stared at the food with the dull suspicion of a man who no longer trusted good fortune. He had crossed too much ruin to believe in kindness without a trap hidden inside it. Yet nothing about the scene felt theatrical. It was ordinary abundance, laid out in open shade on a farm in a state he had never heard named before his capture. Then the thought came, quick and cold. If one farm in the middle of nowhere could feed strangers like this, what did the rest of America look like? He had been told that the United States was soft, divided, and exhausted by luxury. But this table said something else. It said Germany had not marched against a dying nation. It had challenged a superpower with food to spare. The realization did not arrive as patriotism for his captors. It arrived as arithmetic. Dieter Faust had fought long enough to know that armies moved on numbers before they moved on faith. Numbers of trucks, boots, radios, calories, shells, and gallons. Numbers of rails repaired, roads maintained, engines fueled, and ships unloaded on time. If the numbers broke, courage soon followed. He knew how the war had sounded in the East. Engines fading because fuel never came. Horses dragging guns through mud while speeches praised mechanized destiny. Boys in uniforms too large for their shoulders. Field kitchens with more smoke than stew. Germany still spoke in the language of victory, but its supply lines had already begun speaking the truth. Faust was 26, the son of a machinist from outside Kassel. Before the war, he had milled steel parts and listened to older men speak carefully about the last catastrophe. In 1941, he had marched east with confidence that now embarrassed him. By 1944, that confidence had become routine, and routine had become fear wearing the mask of discipline. On the Russian steppe, he had learned the true shape of modern war. Heroism mattered, but logistics decided where heroism was spent. A rifleman could charge on conviction for one day. After that, he marched on bread, oil, ammunition, and dry socks. Winter made the lesson cruel. Distance made it permanent. Germany never solved that equation. By 1944, the United States produced oceans of oil, while Germany scraped together fuel from tiny domestic fields and strained synthetic plants. American factories built nearly 96,000 aircraft in a single year. Germany built far fewer and struggled to keep pilots trained, engines repaired, and runways usable under bombing. Production was no longer background. Production was fate. He did not know every figure, yet he understood the sound of scarcity. Trucks idled only when their drivers were certain. Ammunition was counted twice. Bread was stretched. Spare parts vanished into rumor. In France, before his capture, he had watched a teenage loader fall asleep against a wheel while officers still promised reversal. No speech from Berlin could hide the exhaustion in that small human collapse. The train west had carried men with hollow cheeks and stale propaganda still clinging to their tongues. Some swore America lacked resolve. Some said Russia would collapse any week now. Some insisted Hitler still held a secret reserve. Faust no longer believed in hidden strength. He had seen retreat roads blocked with carts, burned vehicles, and old men pulling what the army could not move. The first meal undid him more than artillery ever had. The chicken skin cracked under his teeth. Butter ran across the corn. The tea was so cold it hurt. He ate quickly, then slower, then stopped with his fork in the air because his body no longer knew how to trust abundance. Behind the screen door, a radio played American music and harvest news. Work details began soon after. German prisoners were sent to nearby farms because American labor was thin during wartime. Faust expected punishment hidden inside the routine. What he found was structure. He rose before dawn, walked through dew-silvered rows, repaired fence posts, cleared ditches, hauled sacks, and returned hungry enough to sleep without dreams. The work was hard, but it was fed, timed, and finite. Everywhere he looked, there were machines. Not a few celebrated machines, but many ordinary ones. Tractors stood beside barns. Trucks arrived when expected. Grain elevators rose above the plains like blunt towers. Roads joined rail spurs joined depots, and depots joined a system so broad that even this quiet county felt connected to distant oceans. This was not glamorous power. It was reliable power. Germany had loved dramatic weapons. America mastered repetition. One side hunted the decisive stroke. The other built systems that could survive error, absorb loss, and keep rolling. By the late war years, the United States had produced hundreds of thousands of trucks, millions of tons of shipping, and staggering amounts of food, fuel, and ammunition. Faust had seen what happened when an army ran out of humble things. At night, the prisoners talked after the lights dimmed. Some still imagined negotiations that would save Germany from total ruin. Some feared what waited for their families beneath Soviet advance and Allied bombing. Some clung to slogans because slogans were lighter than grief. Faust thought of Kassel, of masonry turned black, of his mother carrying water through broken streets, of a machine shop flattened into dust. Autumn deepened. Corn dried into rattling walls. Wind moved through the stalks with a sound like paper being folded by giant hands. Dust settled into seams and collars. The sunset spread long red bands across the horizon and reminded him of villages burning on the steppe. Yet even the landscape here seemed disciplined. Fences were straight. Silos were full. Roads were maintained. Nothing looked theatrical, yet everything testified. Behind every truck stood steel mills, oil wells, machinists, clerks, rubber plants, and rail schedules. Behind every full table stood harvest forecasts, canneries, refrigerated cars, warehouses, and fuel. Germany had conquered territory. America had organized capacity. That was harder to see from a distance, and much harder to beat. He began counting things without meaning to. How many sacks fit on one truck? How many cattle grazed behind a single fence line? How many ears filled a crate? He counted because numbers had betrayed him once, and he wanted to understand the betrayal completely. The answer kept returning with stubborn simplicity. Scale. Not just size, but repeated, dependable scale. Then winter tightened over the plains. Frost-silvered fence wire. Breath smoked in the dark before dawn. Snow came thin, then hard, and the wind found every gap in the barracks' walls. Yet food still arrived. Coal still arrived. Spare clothing still arrived. Nebraska winter did not sound like Russian winter. There was no panic in the silence, only weather. In Russia, snow had muffled artillery until only the wind answered the dying radio. Here, snow settled on grain bins and tracks that still functioned. In one memory, horses froze beside broken wagons. In the other, tractors rested under tarps, waiting for spring. The contrast entered his dreams and stayed there. Even nature seemed different when a nation could still supply itself through cold. As 1944 gave way to 1945, the Reich made one last violent wager in the Ardennes. For a moment, surprise looked like strength, but surprise did not refill depots. Germany burned men and fuel it could not replace. Even its boldest attack revealed the truth it wanted to escape. Resolve could launch a counterstroke. Resolve could not sustain a modern war without endless material behind it. More prisoners reached Nebraska with the same hollow stare Faust had carried months before. Men from France, from anti-aircraft units, from shattered formations raised in desperation. Their stories varied, but the pattern did not. Allied fighter bombers ruled the roads by day. Bridges vanished. Trains carried wreckage instead of reinforcements. Movement had become Allied. Stasis had become German. Aircraft made the imbalance visible, but fuel made it fatal. Allied bombers hit synthetic plants and transport hubs. American oil flowed in quantities Germany could barely comprehend. Every missing truck multiplied the damage of every bomb. Faust had once loved the sound of engines. In 1941, German engines had sounded like momentum. In 1945, they sounded like machines eating the last of themselves. The sound of power had changed sides. By spring, the rumors came daily. Hitler was in Berlin. Hitler was trapped. Berlin was nearly surrounded. Himmler was negotiating. Vienna was gone. The empire that had promised 1,000 years now felt smaller than the barracks room where prisoners whispered at night. Each rumor sounded unbelievable and overdue at the same time. History was closing with astonishing speed. When word spread that Hitler was dead and Germany had collapsed, no single emotion ruled the camp. Some men wept. Some sat down slowly, as if their bones had loosened. Some seemed relieved in ways they could not admit. Faust felt no drama. He felt conclusion. The line had finally reached its sum. What he had sensed under the cottonwoods now stood before him fully formed. He walked that evening to the edge of a field where new green was beginning beneath old stubble. The air smelled of wet soil. Somewhere a screen door slapped shut, just as it had on the day he arrived. And there, with the war ending an ocean away, he saw the whole mechanism at once. A table under a tree, a tractor in a shed, a freight car loaded on time, a refinery burning through the night. A convoy that reached the front because the road, the rubber, the steel, and the fuel all existed in profusion. That was the mathematics of defeat. Germany had worshipped will and sacrifice. America had weaponized surplus, distance, harvests, and repetition. The war would end in ruins, trials, hunger, and a divided homeland. But Faust carried one image above all others. Not a tank, not a banner, not a final speech. A long wooden table under a Nebraska tree, heavy with food that an empire of conquest could not imagine. There he understood the truth of the age. Armies can march on myth for a season. They win only when a nation can feed steel, fuel movement, and outlast every illusion.